Imagine this, an armed citizen, bank employees held hostage, shots being fired, the police standing outside the doors, and people trying to negotiate with the gunman. It sounds quite like a scene right out of a Hollywood thriller, except it was playing out in Beirut in real life, not once or twice, but at least 7 times in the last few weeks. These bank heists in Lebanon have become a growing trend, but here's the catch. These so-called robbers are not stealing anyone else's money. They just want access to their own savings. Savings that they can no longer withdraw from their accounts.
We're going to keep seeing this happen as long as people have money inside. What do you want them to do? They don't have another solution.
So why are these people robbing banks to access their savings? Lebanon is dealing with a crippling economic crisis. Its banks have limited withdrawal of hard currency. They say they make exceptions for humanitarian cases. But such exemptions are very rare. So citizens are forced to resort to violent means. For many in the West Asian nations, these citizens have become heroes. Heroes that are fighting for their own rights. So just how bad is the situation in Lebanon right now? This is Lebanon's worst economic crisis in modern history, posing the biggest threat to its stability since the civil war. Let me give you some figures now. On Monday, the Lebanese pound fell to a new low against the US dollar. In the last 2 years, the currency has lost 95% of its value. So how did it reach a situation like this? In 2015, the IMF detected a $4.7 billion hole in the central bank's reserves. What Lebanon was doing was this, offering banks interest rates that would reach double figures. This move was to attract dollars. But these were rates that the bank would never be able to repay. So the result was this. The fiscal deficits kept widening. The bank was calling this financial engineering. Others called it a Ponzi scheme. And since then, foreign currency reserves have dropped dangerously low. The GDP plunged to $20.5 billion in 2021 from $55 billion back in 2018. This is a kind of contraction usually associated with wars, driving up prices and demolishing purchasing power. Lebanon's banks have frozen ordinary depositors out of dollar accounts. Withdrawals have been severely limited, and now, after multiple holdups, banks are shut in the country for 3 days, a move that has further angered citizens across Lebanon. In Beirut, protesters stormed the Justice Palace. They protested against the detention of 2 people, both of whom were involved in bank holdups last week. In Tripoli, several protesters blockaded roads, burning tires and smashing windows of ATMs.
The revolutionaries are not puppets. When you want them, you can take them. This is forbidden. We will build Lebanon. We tell you, Michel Aoun, leave, and we, God willing, our children, will build Lebanon.
The situation in Lebanon is very unstable right now. Banks are closed. Protesters have descended back to the streets. The country is looking at a political void as politicians did not choose a name to succeed President Michel Aoun, who supposedly leaves his presidential seat in the end of next month. Also, the maritime border dispute between Lebanon and Israel over gas has not seen an end, and the drumbeats of war are soaring in the country.
For now, the only solution is an IMF bailout. The IMF delegation arrived in Lebanon on Monday, and this is to follow up on the implementation of reforms. In April, there was a staff-level agreement on a $3 billion loan facility. The loan will be disbursed over 4 years. This will be in return for implementation of an economic recovery plan, one that will see the country overhaul its banking sector, restructure its debt, and rationalize government spending.
Now, many in Lebanon fear that this is just the beginning of an endless chaos in the streets. Though the headline looks like it is an economic crisis, but in depth, it is a political crisis. Many Lebanese politicians were able to transfer their money after the crisis started to foreign banks outside the country. But the question here is about accountability.
Let me introduce our guest on this broadcast. Joining us now is Laurie Hetayan from Beirut. She's a political analyst and the national coordinator of the Taqaddum political party. Laurie, welcome to the broadcast. Now, my first question to you. Ordinary citizens are pointing a gun at bank staff. This is not some well played out bank heist. What sense does it give us about the economic crisis in Lebanon as of now?
Look, the situation in the country is very bad on all levels, talking about everyday difficulties, starting from electricity blackouts and then having bad connections, internet connections, and then having very expensive petrol, so very difficult for people to go to work, because it's becoming very expensive. And then when you go to work, your salaries have not been adjusted because it's impossible for the private or public sector. And then the inflation is very high, and definitely recession has been very bad for forever, even before the economic collapse, total collapse that we had since end of 2019, beginning of 2020. So everyday life is a struggle for the people living in this country, from small services to whatever you think that is your right, from having electricity or having water in your household, or being able to work from home or from your work because of the internet and because of all the challenges to go to work.
Right, Laurie, but I think the big question is, can these even be termed as bank robberies? I mean, these are citizens trying to access their own savings after all.
Look, for 3 years since the beginning of this crisis, and definitely it affected the banking sector, there were supposed, for the government was supposed to take action. And part of it is like really to have this capital control, to really control what's happening and the collapse. The government did not take any kind of measures, and therefore every day there were people hearing that influential people, politically exposed people, had the means to take away their monies from the banks, to transfer them from Lebanon to outside, when the normal people had difficulties in getting their money out of the bank. There were limits to what they could withdraw. And then with the dollar rate that had been completely crazy now, they had been losing the money that they had. The local currency has lost its value. And those who have dollars in the bank, they cannot access it. And if they want to access it, they have to turn it into a Lebanese rate that is completely not what is at the, if you want, at the market rate, the dollar rate. So therefore, like on every occasion, people were losing their money if they would want to withdraw it in Lebanese lira, or if they have these amounts, they can withdraw it from US dollars. So it became very difficult. There are humanitarian cases where people wanted money to go to put their families, loved ones in hospitals, and they couldn't because the hospital was asking for money, and they couldn't get their own money from the banks. So desperate cases that has led people to go into banks and ask for their money by force, because the government is not taking any measures to make people's life easier. And it's different. There are differences between those people who have the connections and those people who don't have the connections. All of these, the lack of measures and this different type of if you want, behavior from those who have money, from those who don't have money, or from those who have connections, from those who don't have connections, all of that led to what is happening today. The lack of action from the Lebanese government has led people to take things into their hands, and desperate moments are pushing people to take desperate actions. And definitely the fault is on the banking sector, who are refusing to do any kind of reform, and the government of Lebanon, who's refusing to take any kind of reform to really start the IMF program and to put the country back into the right track and into the recovery the economy. They are refusing to do so for 3 years now.
Absolutely, Laurie, from what you're saying and also from the visuals that we are playing out for our viewers, it gives us a sense of the anger and desperation on the streets. But I think the big question now is, what's the way forward out of this economic crisis?
The economic crisis is very clear how to get out of it. It's very clear today the only option we have is the IMF program, and there are prerequisites for any kind of deal with the IMF, and these have to do with the removal of bank secrecy. This has to do with the restructuring of the banks. This has to do with the capital control law. This has to do with the budget, to pass the budget. Imagine we're in September 2022 and the parliament is still discussing the 2022 budget. And this is not acceptable. And they're discussing it without any economic outlook for the country, without any economic recovery plan. They're just numbers that mean nothing. And they're just discussing measures and discussing how to increase taxes on people. And when people are at the poverty rate, we have 80% poverty now, with that much increase since the start of the crisis. So it's very much known what the government needs to do so that we sign an IMF deal, which will increase confidence, which will bring more investment to the country. The IMF deal would be like maybe something around $3 billion in installments, but that will bring confidence so that we attract more investment into the country to start the economic growth. Unfortunately, the current government is refusing to take any reform actions and measures, and they're just doing nothing. No action is the strategy of the government to so that they would survive.
Right, Laurie, thank you so much for all those inputs and perspective. We at WION will, of course, continue to track this story. WION World is One is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.